What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Claudia Bellafato holding it down for us in the DraftKings studios in Boston. Got a great show for you guys. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network and the best of noon to 1 p.m. Eastern, wherever you hear VSiN on the radio. Great guest today, Laiatu Latu, UCLA All-American linebacker and now likely first-round draft pick in the NFL, going to join us, talk about his combine journey, the importance of rugby in his stops along the way, and all the other great things coming off his combine appearance and what he did there. We have got plenty of wild action from the world of women's college basketball yesterday as everybody was knucking and bucking, and we got a tournament full of juice on deck here. We've also got a little bit of the Oscars stuff to get to. I know my father, who usually is someone that's in bed by, we'll say conservatively, like 6 o'clock, 6:30 Pacific Mountain Time, whatever you guys are on there in Arizona. You actually stayed up and watched the entire Oscars last night, which I'm proud of you.
I did. As far as the time change is concerned, where I am in Arizona, we don't move the clock, but we end up, we were Mountain Time, but now we're Pacific Time. We don't move the clock. And the Oscars started an hour earlier, which I think everybody, especially on the West Coast, I'm sure, or the East Coast, as Claudia could attest to, had to be happy about that because that thing always ran long, always ran late. I'm not going to lie, I don't really watch these shows anymore. The old patting on the back of how great we are and how meaningful all our stuff is kind of, gives me that feeling a little bit. But the Oscars were actually pretty good last night. There were a couple pretty good skits, with John Cena in it, Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito. Maybe I'm saying that because those guys, people are more my era, but I actually thought it was pretty good. Billie Eilish, I thought, put on a great show. And, of course, Ryan Gosling singing his song. Everybody was waiting for that, and I actually enjoyed it. I thought the show was pretty good. The awards kind of went somewhat the way, as we're going to talk about it later, paying off cash it or trash it, how that all went. But Mike, I kind of enjoyed it last night. I'm not going to lie.
I don't know how you guys do it.
Yeah, listen, I was Claudia's all the way out on the Oscars here. That's the one thing we found out in the pre-show today. You just don't have that in you.
Well, Cena, for everything you said, why you haven't watched it, I'm the same way. I try every time it's on. I'll put it on, and I just cringe. I can't wait for everybody else to laugh. I'm not laughing. I'd rather go watch literally any other sporting event out there. Table tennis, I'd rather watch. I know basketball was going on, so it made it easy, but no, I can't do the Oscars. I'm sorry. I just can't.
Yeah, no, I can understand. You sound like you have an Oscar opening monologue problem, which I'm with you is always the most difficult part to, I think, work through and read the room on. We've heard about the difficulty of doing that in general. And so once you got through that, we will get to some other interesting nuggets in there. I have a take coming off the Oscars last night that I want to debut here that I feel pretty good about here that to me was my biggest takeaway from last night. But we'll get to that because, Claudia, if you wanted other stuff last night to hold your attention, boy, oh boy, did you get it, especially from the NFL, as we got legal tampering that gets started today, which is the most hilarious process on earth that gets going at noon Eastern, where now officially everyone can kind of start poking around and canoodling, but they've already sort of been canoodling, and we're never really sure totally how that works. And it did give way to some incredible news about one Russell Wilson and his future with the Pittsburgh Steelers, as we had that news break very late last night, even after the Oscars, that Russell Wilson will be, in fact, taking his talents to Pittsburgh for his 13th season, amongst a host of other quarterback-related news from this weekend, Claudia.
Yeah, for Russ, it's a one-year deal, and of course, we talked about him going to visit the Steelers. It was a long meeting that turned out to a price tag at just $1.2 million for Pittsburgh. So great deal for them, with Denver picking up most of his $39 million salary. We also had the Patriots finalizing a deal to send Mac Jones to his hometown, the Jacksonville Jaguars, in exchange for a 6th-round pick in the 2024 draft, and then Baker Mayfield re-signed with Tampa on a $100 million deal. But of course, Russ is the one that tops all of these headlines, guys. What do you think about this one?
So, Dad, we had talked about this some last week and mentioned that with Russ's price tag, he was going to be appealing for a lot of teams. And while some weird press conference moments aside, I can't wait for him to try and insert yins into a conversation, really, I'm sure, organically at a presser and really ingratiate himself with the locals there. I think the biggest worry, if I'm a Pittsburgh fan right now, is that I don't know what this does to, again, raise our ceiling. The Steelers are a team that we know can get to the playoffs. We know can win over 50% of their games, but Russell Wilson, I think even on his best day at this point, especially in the division that they're in right now, doesn't make you a Super Bowl contender, and that's the thing that fans around there are really craving. So I don't know if this just gets you to the next quarterback, if it gets you through the end of Kenny Pickett's rookie deal. It's at the very least competition, but that seems like a low bar to clear.
Well, to me, they weren't going to get a quarterback, in my opinion, that was going to make them a Super Bowl-ready team, right? If there was going to be a quarterback available, we all think the best one available, and he may not even be, is Kirk Cousins, right? Of the ones out there available. Even if you put Cousins on that team, I'm not going to sit there and say they're going to even win the North, let alone be a Super Bowl contender. But what they are is better with Russell Wilson at quarterback than Kenny Pickett. And they got him on the cheap. We had talked about this forever. The league minimum for vets, I think, is $1.2 million. So that's all they're paying, with Denver picking up the rest of the $39 million deal. So it was basically an easy thing to do. In my opinion, this should not be, well, we'll let them compete. Russell Wilson should go in as the starter. I'm sorry, he's a better quarterback than Kenny Pickett. For all we're saying about Russell Wilson, and he certainly has struggled the last couple of years, 2 years more than last year, I still am inserting him at the quarterback position. Kenny Pickett's had a couple of years. They keep talking about the faith they have in him, 13 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. Can he start to get better? Well, we'll see. Maybe he will. But to me, Mike, I'm... You know, they always say you love competition at every single position, but quarterback is a position you want a clear-cut winner, is you want somebody taking over that team. And I just think now that you brought Russell Wilson in, even though it was on really big time on the cheap, that he has got to me, he's the starter of that team.
Yeah, and Schefter made a good point, too, about that. He said this is not something that they made concrete, that Russ is going to be the starter. And I know he didn't have a ton of leverage coming into it. It was more of a team-friendly deal. But is he really going to go into a situation where he doesn't feel like he has that opportunity to be the number one? You just said it, Senior. 13 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, bottom 5 QBR for Kenny Pickett last season. I know we haven't seen a ton from him, but I think we've seen enough of a sample size. And we've seen enough of a sample size from Russ to know that he should get that QB1 spot. And Tomlin said at the end of last season, he hopes there's competition for Pickett. He wanted there to be. I don't know how much of a competition this will be, though, GoJo.
Yeah, and we had Cam Hayward on the show. He said the same thing. One of their captains, kind of that had been the party line there, was we want competition at every position. That's how we get down around here in this building. What I will say, and Claudia, I think you make a good point, and this kind of takes the rest of the quarterback picture into account, is of the places he might have gone. And we heard after the fact, I think I saw Diana Rossini tweet that if it hadn't been Pittsburgh, he was open to teams like the Las Vegas Raiders, like the New England Patriots, who just sent Mac Jones down to Jacksonville. But when you look around, there's a lot of these teams that also could now be linked to young quarterbacks. To Dad's point, Pittsburgh, a lot further back in the first round of the draft. Their pick doesn't come till 20th in the draft, but Las Vegas sitting there at 13th. New England obviously up at 3, all potentially within range of taking young quarterbacks, where if you're Russ, I'm sure part of you is still looking for a future. Part of you is still thinking, hey, if I can make it work this year, I can make it work beyond this right now on the cheap for somebody and rehab my image. But if you go potentially to either one of those places, it could be one of those situations where it's Russ and a young player. Here, you're coming in a guy in Kenny Pickett who's also trying to pick his career up off the mat. And so, Dad, I think of those spots, this one, if Russ manages to hit, could give him the best potential for either longevity here or elsewhere versus any one of those spots where there's still nothing precluding them from taking a young guy and bringing him in just to hand off the baton.
Yeah, as we mentioned, legal tampering going on, and that starts today, free agency, and a lot of these deals that everybody is reading about or hearing about, nothing could be finalized till Wednesday. That's the first day of the new league year. And we talked about the musical chairs at the quarterback position. You know, where would the seats be taken and what team would still be walking around all the chairs looking? Right, and so now we have that first spot. The first spot, that first quarterback sitting in a seat. Actually, we got two that we're going to get to, another one as well. So what was thought to be maybe, wow, these guys maybe move around. We knew Russ was, but we get a couple. We got one for sure in Baker Mayfield, maybe another in Kirk Cousins. We'll see that may not be moving around, so may not get a lot of the musical chairs that we thought we might get.
Yeah, so you mentioned the Baker Mayfield signing yesterday. I think that's the other one, as you're right, as we waited for these dominoes to fall. Russ was getting released. We knew that, and so you're right. Yeah. He was going to occupy a new chair at the table. For Baker Mayfield, this was what was expected by and large, was that he was going to come back, that Tampa Bay wouldn't let him out of the building, especially once they re-signed Mike Evans to the deal that he did there. And Baker Mayfield gets that 3-year deal with $100 million total, $50 million guaranteed. Basically, it's like a series of 1-year deals, kind of mostly a 2-year deal with a lot of that money front-loaded in the contract, but it gives him the reward for what he's done. It gives him a little bit of security, and for Tampa Bay, it keeps them competitive in one of the weakest divisions in all of football right now. So, Dad, this one to me made the most sense. It does affect teams like the Patriots, potentially teams like Minnesota, all of whom we heard might be looking at Baker Mayfield if Kirk Cousins decide to do what seems what's increasingly likely, Dan. I saw Diana Rossini reporting yesterday that the Vikings expected to hear from Kirk Cousins last night about his future plans. We know that the Falcons have been the odds-on favorite for a while, and that certainly does seem like the path with all the smoke coming out where the fire likely sits. So how do you feel about the way this shakes out if Kirk Cousins lands in Atlanta? I think they instantly become the favorite even in this division where Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield just did it last year.
You know, first, I'm happy for Baker Mayfield. Listen, he's a guy who teammates love, right? I mean, you love a guy that just puts his body on the line. He's not the most talented guy out there, but he's going to do everything possible to try and make the play, try and run through somebody, get in somebody's face. I mean, he's just, if you're on his team, he's a likable teammate without question. And we know that the expectation from going to Cleveland, how high he was picked and not going well there, and then Carolina, and then that big moment with the Rams when he signs on a Thursday and leads a 2-minute comeback at the end of the game, to now throwing for the most touchdowns last year, 28 touchdowns. That's a personal high for him on a 1-year, $4 million deal to turn that into $100 million, 50 guaranteed. Good for him. You know, that's a guy, 1-year deal, didn't have a lot of choices out there, wanted to resurrect his career, Claudia, and that's exactly what he did. So good on Tampa to keep both him and Mike Evans and try and keep that train rolling a little bit.
He resurrected it, which is why I'm sort of surprised looking at the odds here, because the Bucs are second behind Atlanta in the division. The Falcons plus 110 favorite. Bucs pretty far behind if we're talking this division, plus 260. You would think they'd be a little bit closer or maybe even a favorite after the Baker news. And I think what this tells us is that Falcons-Kirk Cousins deal maybe is a little bit closer than we think, GoJo.
Yeah, that seems to be the indication. And it's so funny on the surface because the idea that Kirk Cousins, just vibes-wise, based on what we know is history, vibes-wise, Kirk Cousins combining with perennial loser, the Atlanta Falcons, does not seem like something that we should trust on the surface. And yet, Dad, when I look at this from the football standpoint, with everything we've mentioned, with the fact that Zach Robinson is a guy that comes from that Shanahan-McVay tree from Los Angeles, Raheem Morris is inheriting a defense that made massive strides forward last year. The offense is a treasure trove of guys like Drake London and Bijan Robinson and all these offensive weapons that when you combine combined with a quarterback who's the adult in the room, feels like it should be very enticing from a football standpoint. So a lot of conflicted feelings because the analyst in me says, oh my God, this could be very exciting. And I'd absolutely pick them to win the NFC South. And then the person who's watched NFL football like a moron says, wait a minute, these two things should not be a successful marriage by any means.
Listen, I think he's going back to Minnesota. I think Atlanta's going to be one of those teams that's continuing to walk around the chairs and going, wait a minute, we got to fill a slot at the most important position there is. And who's going to be left? Who's going to be left? I mean, we have Justin Fields out there. If he's going to be traded before the draft, we'll wait and see. But that's not getting a Russell Wilson or a Baker Mayfield or Kirk Cousins, who they wanted. So I'll be in. They have the 8th pick in the draft too. Does Atlanta? So I do think Cousins is going to go back to Minnesota, the best businessman quarterback there is over the years, and make probably another $100 million. And then I'm wondering what Atlanta's going to do.
Well, I think it's a two-part question I have. Is one, I am curious what the price tag for Kirk Cousins likely appears. I think Tom Pelissaro said he expects it to be north of $40 million a year because if Baker Mayfield's getting $30 million a year and a little bit more than that in the way this is structured, then yeah, we know Kirk Cousins is another level up from that. But Dad, I would ask why you think he's going back to Minnesota at this point, because when I look at this situation, if I'm Kirk Cousins, if money's even close to equal, and I'm assuming everyone's going to have to be playing in the same ballpark on this, what Atlanta has is a much better opportunity for him at this point in his career to actually get back to the postseason. Because when you look at the NFC North, it's going to be a dogfight next year. You've got obviously the defending North champions, Detroit Lions, who everyone expects to be an NFC favorite and a Super Bowl favorite for next year. But the Green Bay Packers and what Jordan Love did by the end of last season, this division is going to be hell on earth. And God forbid the Chicago Bears pop off with their treasure trove of things and potential that we've talked about here. Minnesota in the position they're in versus Atlanta and everything we just described doesn't really seem comparable in terms of the ease of the path to the dance that you'd have.
So as we always talk about with players, is what's your motivation? He's a guy that's been in the league since 2012. The last 6 years have been in Minnesota. Now I know, if I remember correctly, his wife's family is in Atlanta, so that certainly would be a feather in the cap there. But we know he's got kids. We've seen him, in the shows and stuff with the kids. He's been in Minnesota 6 years. So as I've always said with free agents, what's your reasoning? Let's say the money's around the same, which I think it probably will be. I think it will be in that range, which what other guys are getting paid. I get it. So we'll see what his motivation is. Again, 6 years there. The kid's in school, are starting school. Do you want to keep them in school there? Have they settled there a little bit? I don't know, because I'm with you. If you look at the situations, Atlanta, with what they have on the offensive side and the division that they're in, would be a pretty nice, pretty appealing place to go on being able to win that division and move on into the playoffs. But we have to wonder what's going on in his mind of being in the league for a long time and being in Minnesota the last 6 years.
Yeah, I still think this is a guy that's tremendously football motivated. Like, I don't know if we've reached the point now where it's just, hey, like, I'm going to settle with everything else because of where that's at. But that's going to be the last big domino to fall, I think, before we start really being able to slot out who goes where in terms of the young quarterbacks in this draft. We know that's been hotly contested. But, Dad, if history's taught us anything about the quarterbacks getting ready to get drafted, Mac Jones reminded us yesterday that, boy, oh boy, is it a crapshoot. Because now, when you look at the top round of the 2021 NFL draft and the 5 quarterbacks that were drafted in Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones, it is, I think, the expected outcome that 4 of those 5 guys are going to be traded in the last 2 off seasons, and 3 of them likely this offseason, with Matt kicking off the party now, getting to go and try and resurrect his career near home down in Jacksonville. Justin Fields we expect to be traded soon. Zach Wilson as well out in New York, and Trey Lance, who's already been moved around some. It's a great reminder that so much of this ends up being about the environment that you come into, and if a team is not ready to sustain that, boy oh boy, does that feel like a cautionary tale for some folks this year. This is how you can end up just a few years later.
Yeah, listen, this is the cautionary tale to say be careful of how many quarterbacks you see go in the first round, because as we've said, the hit rate is 50%. So you're gonna get one. Your team's gonna get one, and you better cross your fingers. Is our guy on the good side of that 50% or the bad side of that 50%? And you find out early, right? With these guys that have already been traded. You know, Trey Lance didn't do anything before he was traded. Other guys have gotten their shot and failed and are getting traded, and you move on. You're moving on quicker with these quarterbacks. And so as we're going to see 5 quarterbacks, I think, taken in the first round of this year's draft, again, it's a hold your breath situation on which ones are going to actually hit, because we're seeing the proof right here.
And New England has been clearing out space. Clearly, they're at the 3rd overall pick. And man, that seems like another spot where I don't know if that's a team right now where they're at that's ready to bring in and start a young guy and have it go very well. So lots to pay attention to in the game of musical chairs around the NFL as legal tampering gets going today. But coming up next, Dad mentioned hit rate. Let's talk about maybe the biggest hit we saw all weekend. South Carolina and LSU women's hoops gave us a show on a very busy women's college basketball Sunday. Next.
South Carolina took down LSU in the SEC Women's Basketball Championship game yesterday, but that wasn't really what everybody was talking about. They were talking about the brawl that ensued in this game. South Carolina forward Camila Cardoso was one of 6 players ejected from the championship game after she shoved LSU's Flau'jae Johnson to the floor late in the 4th quarter of the Gamecocks win. Here's what LSU head coach Kim Mulkey had to say.
Do you realize there was only 1 foul called on each team with 2 minutes to play in the 4th quarter? Are you kidding me? That might have created some of that. Not the way we play. We're going to foul your ass. Not the way they play. They're going to foul your ass. But you only blew that whistle 1 time? Think about that now. It's ugly. It's not good. No one wants to be a part of that. No one wants to see that ugliness. But I can tell you this. I wish she would have pushed Angel Reese. Don't push a kid. You 6'8", don't push somebody that little. That was uncalled for, in my opinion. Let those two girls that were jawing, let them go at it.
Senior, nobody says it better than Kim Mulkey, feathers and all to add dramatic effect. Yeah. What's your take on this one, Senior?
Well, I think the two things there, I actually think she's more right about the first thing she said. When the refs let things go and you have two physical teams, and there's no doubt these are two physical teams, that if you let that go, they're going to see how much, and this is what you do as a player. You gauge how much you can get away with. And the more you can get away with, you take it, they give you an inch, you're going to take 5 inches, then you're going to take a yard, and you're going to take it until they start blowing the whistle. And to Kim's point, one foul, they weren't blowing the whistle. So it was getting more and more physical out there, and I don't blame the players one bit for it. So I can see that point of it. Her other point about, pushing someone smaller, to me, is ridiculous. You don't, when there's something that goes on and you're sticking up for your teammate, you stick up from the person that's doing the thing on the other team that made you mad. It's not like Flau'jae Johnson did that, and all of a sudden she's going to go say, well, okay, she's too small. Let me go find Angel Reese, who wasn't involved in this right away. This was Johnson who was involved, but let me go find someone else. Kim, that's not how it works, okay? When your teammate goes and sticks up for...
The first rule of Fight Club is go find someone your size.
Well, I mean, that's ridiculous. You get the person that's causing the ruckus. And that's what she did, and she decked her. And listen, at the end of the day, she went too far, and it was wrong, and she said that as well. I get it, but it's from a fight standpoint, if you're going to go after someone, you go after someone who was, in your mind, causing the problem. You don't say, okay, that person caused the problem. Let me go find somebody else to fight. I mean, that's somewhat ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's a completely ridiculous notion. Kim Mulkey cannot help but always find her way to the pettiest response possible in this. And this is after Dawn Staley came out right after the game, after her team won the championship, and said, I want to apologize on behalf of everyone involved in all of this. This is not the way we want to represent it. This one got away from him. We'll address it. All those things. And the housekeeping, I know it got mixed up a bit in the broadcast. Camila Cardoso is actually the only player that was ejected in this group that's going to miss the first round NCAA tournament game coming up after selection weekend because of when she was thrown out and because of her involvement in the altercation. So she's going to miss South Carolina's first round game of the tournament. Everybody else who was ejected is going to be eligible for both teams to play in the NCAA tournament coming up, which could have had huge ramifications if that initial report was true. But we got to get to the funniest part of this. And thankfully, it didn't go worse. Like, we could laugh about this because nothing ended up coming of it other than the arrest. But Flau'jae Johnson's brother jumping over the scorer's table in the midst of all of this. So, Dad, everyone's protective instincts, to your point, went up. Camila Cardoso is all of 6'7", maybe even 6'8", is one of the best basketball players in the country for the best basketball team in the country. South Carolina, the only undefeated program in men's or women's college basketball. This obscures completely how they got here, by the way, which is in the semifinal round where Camila Cardoso attempts, I think, only her second or third three-pointer at the buzzer and makes her first career three-pointer at the buzzer to beat Tennessee to get them here. But she is the big on this team, even on a team full of other very large, tall women. And so she comes over and she inserts herself in that situation to help her teammate. You know who else felt that protective instinct? Flau'jae Johnson's brother. The problem is he's a man in the crowd not playing in this game. And so when he hopped over the scorer's table, all hell broke loose. But my favorite part in all of this, Dad, because he threw not one punch in there. He was swiftly apprehended. He was handcuffed and taken out of there. The funniest part of all this was the moment where he realized he was in way over his head, because you can very clearly see when he jumps on the court and he stands next to all 6'7" of Camila Cardoso and realizes this is what 6'7" looks like. When you're up close and personal, that man immediately fell back and said, let me make this somebody else's problem. Sis, you got this. I could not stop laughing the entire time. In a day and age defined by the F around and find out meme, this might have been the purest dose of it.
Yeah, listen, he's someone who didn't think at first, right? It was in protective mode of his sister, and he hopped the table. I don't know if I'm going to go so far and say he looked at her and got scared because how big she was, but
he did.
I just think he realized he hopped over.
You saw him right there. He looked up, he saw this, and he said, okay, you know what? Y'all got this one. You got this.
I don't know if I believe that. I don't think he went out there with the intention to fight anybody. I mean, because he didn't do that at all. He just kind of got in people's way. And then I just think he realized what a bad move it was. So I probably am not going to go as far as you in this one. He got over the table. I mean, jumped over the table and got on there and then just realized what a bad spot he was in. And I mean, right away, an officer came over and led him away. So luckily nothing came of it. But man, that was some quick instinct and then some real secondary thoughts almost immediately as he hit the court.
Either way, Dad, you know who's not going to care about the description you just gave? His group chats. That man is going to get flamed so hard in his respective friend groups, he may never recover. I know, based on being a longtime veteran of group chats, that's not going to go well for him in any way, shape, or form. What I will say, Dad, is while everyone involved said the right things about this not being something that anybody wanted to be involved in, certainly don't want to see it. It's by no means the ugliest show of force we've seen on a basketball court, probably even this year. I mean, hell, we had North Carolina or Duke fans throwing water bottles at the North Carolina basketball team after that loss, and John Filipkowski tripping dudes in the game. Duke is so back, by the way. Villain Duke, absolutely what the men's tournament needed, because comparatively, Dad, watching this weekend, the thing that I came away with most as we saw our Notre Dame Fighting Irish women's team beat NC State for an ACC championship, as we saw Caitlin Clark in a fourth quarter comeback for the ages, in a second half and overtime that continues to add to the lore around this young woman's career, and they win their third straight Big Ten championship. You look at the names I just mentioned in all of that. You look at Hannah Hidalgo and Juju Watkins at USC, who won the Pac-12 championship yesterday, and all these names I just threw at you. The women's tournament has comparatively so much more juice going in than the men's tournament. You've got stars because of a day and age where right now the WNBA has made strides in their salaries, but it's still not the winning lottery ticket that you see for its NBA counterparts. And so you get players that stay in college the full term and then some. You get to, like we've always talked about, get to know characters in the sport, have them accomplish enough and have enough battles against each other to create moments that we want to see again. Everyone would sign up for LSU and South Carolina meeting up again at some point in the tournament. Everyone would sign up for a rematch of what we saw with Caitlin Clark against some of these teams last year. And so I do think the women's game might be reaching its zenith in this season, where you've got all of this drama and so much compelling play that now leads to a tournament that should be one for the books.
I agree. As soon as that bracket gets released, it's going to be fun to look at when you're going to get those matchups you just talked about, right? Where are you in the same, side of the bracket? Other side, can you only meet in the championship? Could it be in the semis? Could it be earlier? That's going to be the fun. And then the newcomers you mentioned, like Juju Watkins at USC, how they fare in their first tournament. Hannah Hidalgo, who's been everything for Notre Dame in the ACC, how she fares with her team in the first tournament. But I agree. I'm excited to see when the bracket comes out when these matchups are going to happen.
Going to be a doozy, and just a good reminder as we get to the tournament. Everybody in stands, stay your ass there. You did good. You tried hard. At the end of the day, you got to take your ass back to the student section and make sure you don't get hurt.
We're back here on GoJo and Golic, where it's time to discuss some of the transactions that went on over the weekend, specifically with wide receivers, starting with Tyler Lockett, who is remaining with Seattle on a restructured deal, 2 years, $30 million, max value of $34 million. And the Broncos reportedly trading Jerry Jeudy to Cleveland in exchange for a 2024 5th and 6th round pick. Sources say the Browns have been interested in Jeudy since last offseason, so finally looks like they're getting the deal done, GoJo.
Yeah, so for both of these, first off, I hadn't even seen the Tyler Lockett deal. Thank God. You talk about someone who deserves to spend their entire career in one uniform. Tyler Lockett has been the most criminally underrated wide receiver of an age during this time. Him and Russell Wilson for so long, the ESP between them was like prime Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown, where they always seemed to be on the same page. I have said routinely during that era, if you asked me to put my life in the hands of one quarterback and receiver relationship, it would have been Russ and Tyler Lockett, which is a testament, one, to Tyler Lockett, and two, how far we've come with the Russell Wilson conversation. But that's a story for another day. Dad, the Jerry Jeudy one's a little more interesting to me just because this was a guy that came out of Alabama, and this treasure trove wide receiver room was so much promise. It obviously, for a litany of reasons, hasn't worked out in Denver, but now going to Cleveland, this feels like a wide receiver room that is sort of majoring this. They did this last year as well with bringing in some wide receiver talent that was cast off out of New York, but now fits into a room where a little bit of a redundant skill set. When you think of Jerry Jeudy, I think he's always been billed as more of the route runner that works alongside Amari Cooper, who obviously is nicknamed the route runner, which is a terrible nickname, but a great testament to his skill set. So overall, good move for the Browns, but none of it really matters if Deshaun Watson plays like he has the last couple of years. So I don't know how to feel about this other than great bargain bin talent. Now your quarterback needs to perform like the guy you paid $230 million to.
Yeah, listen, first on Tyler Lockett, I'm happy for him. I'm glad he got that deal. I'm glad he stayed in Seattle. As Claudia mentioned, 30 mil, 13 guaranteed in that one. So good for him. I'm a big fan of his. Jerry Jeudy, man, boy, on the way out, did he catch a whole lot of shrapnel from people about, but again, you're the 15th pick in the draft. A lot more is expected of you at a wide receiver position where we have seen guys come in and be really good right out of the gate. He never really was that in his 4 years there, starting with his rookie year, 52, 38, 67, and 54 receptions. He did average 14 and a half yards per reception, 11 total touchdowns. So this is one of those, I think, Mike, where he gets a fresh start somewhere. And I think players realize it. I know what writing is on the wall before anybody else. And he has not been what the thought process would be of where he was picked. Now, as you mentioned, you go through a few quarterbacks when you're in Denver. They've been trying to find a quarterback forever since Peyton Manning and they won the deal in 2015. So they've been looking for a while now. So I'm always, listen, we're always on players' sides. I hope he can turn it around. I hope he can look like the first rounder. I hope it happens in Cleveland where you're there with Amari Cooper and David Njoku, who had a monster year last year as well. But to tie it all up, you're right. If you don't get a quarterback that's with the ability to dish that ball around, doesn't matter. If you're going to get Nick Chubb back, one of the better running backs in the league as well, coming off the serious injury he had last year. But if Deshaun Watson can't turn it around, we know they went through 4 quarterbacks last year, but it's all on Deshaun Watson, whether they want to or not. That's just the way it is because of what the owners wanted there and what they gave him. You're right. It's exactly what it comes down to. Can Deshaun Watson, we keep saying, can he get back to what he was? Can he get back to what he was? Right now, it's not even close.
Think about what we said last week. When Russell Wilson, it was announced, was going to get released from the Denver Broncos. We said, this right now feels like the consensus worst trade in NFL history. And the only thing that we felt like was in position to usurp that was the Deshaun Watson trade. So think about what Jerry Jeudy is walking into right now. Where, yes, I mean, listen, we talked to Zadarius Smith last week, and I think it's echoed by a lot of guys. Look at the vibes around Cleveland. They look at that roster, and they see, hey, this is a Super Bowl caliber roster. We all said it till we were blue in the face last year, and they feel like they've got the parts there. Kevin Stefanski, Coach of the Year, all the things that mix up and look like a good situation for these guys. And yet it feels like they're sitting on a knife's edge, Dad, because Jerry Jeudy could very well walk from that that situation into one that, if it continues to trend in the same direction it has, will be worse than the trade for Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos, and he would be once again left holding the bag.
Oh, listen, I agree. I mean, that's the position you want taken care of the most, and a position the Browns felt they did by giving Deshaun Watson that fully guaranteed deal. They said, okay, basically they said, we're set at the quarterback position, and now they're set at a lot of positions, not the quarterback position. That's a position they are not set on right now. So, yeah, this could bite them in the backside real bad.
This move specifically, though, really underscores what I think is a lackluster wide receiver market right now in terms of free agency and what we've got coming up. And this is the difficulty that comes with the draft producing so many quality young receivers and the way the NFL marketplace works in general, where you don't get many situations like we have, let's say, with a Christian Wilkins right now, where a top-of-the-line defensive player appears posed to actually test free agency and see actually their value because of the franchise tag, and because usually when teams hit on good players, they re-sign those good players, especially at wide receiver, even if that market is starting to go a little bit closer to running back than they're probably comfortable with. But you look at the rest of the best NFL free agents out there, Calvin Ridley, far and away the most productive player in this group, the only actual wide receiver that's got number one capability in the bunch. But then Marquise Brown, Gabe Davis, Curtis Samuel, Darnell Mooney, Odell Beckham Jr., Tyler Boyd, who's always been a compelling third wheel in that Cincinnati offense. But Dad, you look around, do you think this is kind of the future of free agency at this position, given what we're seeing happen in the draft now?
Well, I mean, it could be timing as well, right? I mean, it could be just the timing of when deals are up, because we know there are some young wide receivers that are going to get paid that have produced. This is a crew. Wow, you're right. Calvin Ridley, he had over 1,000 yards, did have, 8 touchdowns on 76 receptions. So he's really just kind of the one you look to and said, okay, maybe he can be that guy. The others, no. I mean, obviously they're going to find homes, but what they do, we'll have to wait and see. I don't know, Mike. I don't know if this is the route of the wide receiver position or if it just happens to be the timing this year that you have this collective group of wide receivers. Though, to your point, there's this collective group of wide receivers because they haven't performed the way a lot of people thought they would perform. So now the teams are saying, go ahead, be a free agent. We're not going to re-sign you because, man, oh, man, there's a whole lot of talent coming in.
Well, and because the franchise tag, you don't have a damning number with a lot of these guys. And so, obviously it's a tool to also negotiate in-house, but it keeps us from getting this stuff. It keeps us from getting a T. Higgins to the open market to where this might be something more akin to a backdoor deal. It keeps us from getting a Michael Pittman Jr. out in the market to see what he could potentially earn. And I would be fascinated by that, Dad, now, because we do run into this thing where you look at the top, forget even the top, the depth of this draft compared to everything else, and say, all right, if you're a team, if you are the New England Patriots sitting up there at 3, and you've got all these options in the world about how you're going to go about this, if you're not sold on quarterback, you're probably going to draft receiver there in Marvin Harrison Jr. But if you do go old there, does Calvin Ridley, or do you do go young there, does Calvin Ridley become a guy that you pick up there, or do you try and go and reset your clock with one of these dudes? Or know that you're going to get one down later in the draft. You've got so many options because of how well-trained and talented these guys are coming out and as young as they are, that we're not getting these bloated salaries as much, I think, for wide receiver talent, at least in the middle of it. The high end, Justin Jeffersons are still going to be taken care of, but the rest of that group is continually going to run into an inventory problem.
Listen, this is where scouting comes into play, right? Can you find that receiver in the 3rd round who's going to hit for you? That's what we keep talking about, first-round quarterbacks that don't hit, but what about mid to later round picks that do? That's where you make your bones. That's your backbone of some teams, is getting those to hit. That was Jimmy Johnson was just so famous for that back in the day with the Cowboys, of finding those guys later in the draft that turned out to be basically Hall of Fame players. It's been impressive.
It has been impressive. We'll get to more NFL news and notes off the top of the next hours. We got a couple of other big marquee signings to get to still.
like the Lakers hosted the Timberwolves last night and they won, but the real story was the fact that AD went unconscious and the numbers he put up were actually historic. 27 points, a season high 25 rebounds, career high 7 steals and 5 assists. He became the first player with at least 25 points, 25 boards, 5 assists and 5 steals in a game since steals became official stat in 1973. But did AD have any idea what he was doing? Here's what he had to say.
I just heard D-Lo on the bench just say, "I bet you can't get a triple-double with steals." He told me I had 7 steals. The rebounds I didn't know much about, so I didn't think I had that many. I think I had like 5.5, so or 4 or something like that. So I didn't think I had. Ended up with 20.
Happy birthday.
How much? 20, 25? It's not. I got a couple hours. But yeah, D-Lo just said, "I bet you can't get steals." I mean, triple-double steals. So, I mean, I knew I probably had at least, like 15 or something like that. But I had 25. I didn't know that.
So GoJo, like I said, knew what he was doing, but really didn't know what he was doing in terms of being a historic night.
Right, and I think this is the conflicting part coming off of this for me and a lot of people, Claudia, is like he's talking about this. We all know this is what Anthony Davis is capable of. This has been the expectation going back to 2020 in the bubble, and yet, Dad, even when I see this great moment, we know exactly what this is. My first thought is very Stugotzian, very School of Fraudcasty. It's, all right, well, can he do this consistently in the postseason? Because we've gotten used to the Anthony Davis roller coaster of emotions and performance when it comes to these 7-game series. And right now for this Lakers team that's gotten a little bit hot as of late, that's beaten them, that's beaten them, that beat the Timberwolves, that beat the Milwaukee Bucks, has had this really good stretch against top teams with him and D'Angelo Russell all playing well. The worry continues to be, hey, when it gets to the most important time of the year, can you count on this consistently or not?
Well, without question. I mean, we've seen a guy that's been nicked up and missing some time. And as we keep bringing up, or I certainly do, once you get to the playoffs and you start getting to a series, it's a little bit different. I think we also have to remember in that win over Minnesota, we know Karl Anthony Towns is out. Rudy Gobert didn't play either. He had a hammy. So there wasn't a whole lot in the middle to stop Anthony Davis in this one with your 2 big guys out.
I mean, we also know LeBron James wasn't in for some of these games, too, as we saw him on the sideline with Jeannie Buss and company cracking jokes and everybody making the very obvious comment that he was likely in the doghouse when we saw him at Bronny's game at SC. Savannah did not look thrilled with what she had been seeing down there, all of that laughing and carrying on.
Riz God, he was. He was a Riz God in that moment.
Yeah. Listen, we're sitting here, waiting. We got about 20 games left, I think, maybe a little less in the regular season, and nothing has changed. I think where we are in the Western Conference is where we're going to be with the top 10. Outside of that is the Rockets, but they're, about 5 games so are back from the 10 slot, which is now Golden State. Golden State and the Lakers flip-flopped a little bit here, so it's still going to be that battle of who's going to be in the play-in games and then what's going to happen. So I think we're keep saying a lot of the same things, Mike, until we get to the play-in game to see who's going to make it in and who's going to be at the top. Like right now, Oklahoma City is at the top of the West.
Well, I mean, Dad, the Lakers, when you look at them right now, are only 2 games back of the Suns in the 6th slot. So it is a little bit of a logjam that we're starting to get down here, mostly because, again, like they've outperformed a little bit. Some of these other teams are dealing with the effects of a long season, right? Oklahoma City, Minnesota, they've been foot down on the gas for a long time at the top of the Western Conference. They're not teams that have accomplished as much in the postseason, so I'm not as surprised there. But you're right. The Lakers, we always figured, gonna be a play-in team more likely than not, even when they're whole. You've seen some of the traits that got them to the Western Conference Finals last year. It's just a matter if they can show up consistently or not. You mentioned Rudy Gobert being out, Dad. He has become the subject of a lot of interesting conversation right now in the NBA, as he was fined $100,000 for making the money gesture towards NBA official Scott Foster. Scott Foster, obviously, it's never good when you know an official's name and character and villain arc as much as we know Scott Foster, his battle with, over the years with his battles over the years with plenty of NBA players and the way that it's shaken out. But here, Rudy Gobert fined as a repeat offender for someone who's in multiple junctures insinuated that someone, and in this case, the insinuation was Scott Foster was doing something to fix this game. Dad, this has to be Adam Silver's worst nightmare. You already, again, have such a well-known official. You've got some history of it in this league, and now you've got a player who just refuses to get off this horse at a time where gambling is more a part of the conversation around your sport than ever before.
It doesn't get worse than this, right? When you're talking about the term always used when it's around gambling is integrity of the sport. So you can complain about an official's calls or this or that, but when you are wondering about their integrity as to how they call a game for gambling issues by making the money sign at an official, you're going to get smacked down with a big time fine anyway. And if you have a little bit of a history there, it's going to be more. So yes, to answer your question, yes, this is about as bad as it would get from the sport side of it, with the gambling side of it, to have somebody like a referee involved in something like this, or a player having the thought process that a ref is. When we don't know what's inside Rudy Gobert's head. He may just have done that out of frustration. Don't know, but they're going to have to drop the hammer, which they did on him for that, because you've seen him, Mike. We've all been in the locker rooms. The signs are up there, man, about gambling. They always have been, always will be. Even though gambling is legal now, it's not with the players, and certainly not with the officials.
Oh, Dad, no, we know exactly what's going on in Rudy Gobert's head. He said it. He said, I'll bite the bullet again. I'll be the bad guy. I'll take the fine, but I think it's hurting our game. I know the betting and all that is becoming bigger and bigger, but it shouldn't feel that way. Like, he is making it very clear, this is what I think is happening, and I am going to continue to raise the alarm on this. And I think you're absolutely right. If you're Adam Silver, the worst thing that you could have is someone, especially on one of the best teams right now, a well-known name. Rudy Gobert is probably going to win another Defensive Player of the Year in the NBA this year. And to have that person who's kind of always been a chaos agent who hurt his team with this technical, oh, by the way, deep into the fourth quarter in this game, for him to still take this as an opportunity to say, this is what I feel at a juncture where you're Adam Silver trying to convince NBA fans, hey, this is okay, we're going to be good with all of this, is incredibly damning. I think something that has to probably be a top line item in the league office.
Yeah, and how, listen, what they do, they send out memos, and things like don't talk about this or don't talk about that. They're going to do that. They're going to reiterate it with owners and general managers or not go down this road. But it's always going to be out there, because we know people all have their tinfoil hats on about it, about what's going on. And we've had a referee, as we saw on that full screen, who has been involved in it. So it's not like it hasn't been there before and been kind of just hanging there anyway. So yeah, I'm with you. This is something Adam Silver just had to just go, oh no. I mean, no, we got to nip this one in the bud. We're going to hit him hard with a fine, and they'll get memos out to everyone and say, let's not go down this road.
And Dad, you're right. With the league's history, with the Tim Donaghy stuff mixed into all of this, this is the closest I think the NBA has to this lingering specter over it, the way the NFL has with head trauma, where for so long you hid this portion of the information from players. It is such a part of your game, and you tried to act like it wasn't. And so now every time instances of player safety come up in the NFL, you've got people that understandably turned a side eye to that and say, we know your history, so why should we believe you here in these spots? And that's exactly, I think, the kind of sentiment that the NBA wants to guard against here. So a task for Adam Silver and company is, you've got Rudy Gobert, who never seems to want to play by anybody's rules other than himself, but that doesn't seem to matter right now, because if the Lakers keep winning the way that they have and eating up the lion's share of attention, I can't imagine many people will talk about the Timberwolves anyway. So maybe that's the whole master plan with all of this. Coming up next, though, we are just getting started. Again, legal tampering in the NFL going to get going at noon Eastern today, but we don't got to worry about any tampering in Titletown. Is it already Chiefs versus the field heading into 2024? We'll get to that question next here on GoJo and Golic.
to GoJo and Golic. GoJo, we have some good news. Chris Jones signed an agreement with the Chiefs for real this time. Oh. He is getting paid 5 years, $158.75 million base, including $101 million in guarantees. He gets a $30 million signing bonus. The first 2 years guaranteed, and his 2026 base salary guarantees in 2025. Coming off of a 10.5 sack season, you got duped by an earlier tweet earlier last week saying that he signed an agreement for a ton of money. He didn't, but he's still getting his bag now with much reason, right, GoJo?
Yeah, my personal nightmare is now over as Chris Jones is firmly signed up. A very verified Adam Schefter, who I should have just checked, follows me, by the way, because I am an important member of the media, definitely tweeted this out. It is definitely true, Dad. And it is, listen, while it's not the fake accounts report of money that's in excess of Aaron Donald, he essentially got paid the Aaron Donald contract. What this amounts to in terms of the guaranteed money over about a 3-year period of this deal is basically a carbon copy of Aaron Donald, but on a timeline where Chris Jones is a year younger than Aaron Donald was when he got that payday. And so it's an admittance, Dad, I think, of a couple of things. One is Chris Jones was just so undeniably good you couldn't pay him any less than this, given the way he's produced for you, not only in the regular season, but I think especially in the postseason for the last couple of years. And it's also the Chiefs saying, yes, we understand the opportunity that we've got right now. And so maybe if in the guy's mid-30s, this contract starts to age a little poorly, that's fine because we've got an opportunity to go out here and do something that the Patriot dynasty that preceded us never did and go back to back to back in championships.
Yeah, this had to get done. And to your point about Aaron Donald, what it did is it laid out a framework for Chris Jones and the deal to get done. That Monday before the Super Bowl, the media night, before they went out for media night, doing the game for Westwood One, we had the ability to interview players for both teams, and I got down and I had a one-on-one with Chris Jones. But even before that interview, we were just kind of talking, and I was kind of asking him about the year before, the 1-year deal. It turned out to be, I think, for about $19 million, and he was talking about, obviously betting on himself, and remember we were at their first game last year when he was holding out, sitting up in the one of the suites and Travis Kelce was out of that game. We watched the Detroit Lions beat Kansas City by 1 point, and everybody was like, uh-oh, Travis is hurt. Chris Jones isn't signed. Fast forward to February, and they're back-to-back Super Bowl champs. So this is a deal we both thought, all three of us thought, had to get done, did get done. As I said, had the framework of the Aaron Donald deal to make it have the ability to get done. Another guy that kind of bet on himself by not going with whatever deal they were working on last year, and it paying off for him. He's a big, scary man. Right in the middle of that defense, and they'll go out and play at the end position as well. I mean, he has been absolutely dominant on that defensive line. So this was a move Kansas City had to make when you're in the midst of a dynasty to see just how far you can go.
We mentioned the Aaron Donald deal a couple times. For anyone unfamiliar, Aaron Donald signed a 3-year, $95 million contract extension with the Rams that had $95 million guaranteed. This deal for Chris Jones ends up with about 3 years of guaranteed money, and including $95 million guaranteed, according to sources telling Adam Schefter. So with that in mind, you look at that data, and now it puts it in the spot where, and Adam popped out the graphic yesterday, we had questions about if Andy Reid was going to retire or not, lingering into the Super Bowl week. We had questions about would Travis Kelce ride off into the sunset and go hang out in Singapore and be a stage husband for his entire life, and would Chris Jones be someone re-signed by the Kansas City Chiefs? And with their decisions between him and L'Jarius Sneed this offseason, they planted their flag, Dad, and now we look at the futures odds surrounding the Super Bowl next season. The 49ers are still the odds-on favorite to win it at plus 550, but the Chiefs right behind them at plus 600. And, Dad, we're at the point now where with what they've accomplished and with what they've brought back, it's Chiefs versus the field. This is Tiger versus the field in a very different shade of red, but red nonetheless, looking out at the rest of the NFL, going, who wants a piece? And my God, Dad, if in a draft as deep in wide receiver talent as this one is, the Chiefs at the back end of the first round get any of the players I've seen them mock to between Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Worthy or any of these guys that could be down and fill a very severe need at that point, Tyron Smith, the Cowboys offensive tackle, sitting out there in the market as they've got to likely replace Donovan Smith. All of this looks like a team that, yes, was as unlikely in the Chiefs Super Bowl era of winning last year, a team I am increasingly looking and going, well, yeah, I'm not going to pick against them to start next season. That would be insane.
Yeah, I don't think you can do it. I mean, guys are stepping up for them, right? We always said it because of Patrick Mahomes. Well, now you have Chris Jones. Now you have some solidified. Let's see what happens with L'Jarius Sneed, who they put the franchise tag on, the DB, because their secondary played extremely well. Do they get him a deal? Does he play on the one-year deal? Do they trade him and save a little bit of cap space? I think that will be an interesting one as well. But guys have hit for him. Who was going to be the receiver? Turns out to be the second rounder in Rashee Rice, to be the actual receiver outside of Travis Kelce. You struck gold a couple of years ago on a seventh rounder with Isaiah Pacheco, right? I mean, that stuff normally doesn't happen. That's good, management. That's good scouting on getting these guys when you get them. They have one of the better O-lines, especially the interior, I should say, of an offensive line. If they do replace the left tackle, think about that, Mike. That will be the fifth left tackle for Patrick Mahomes if they replace Donovan Smith. I mean, that is amazing. One of the most important positions on the line. He could have his fifth one in his time there at Kansas City. But you have the best quarterback right now, and the pieces you're building around it, and you're keeping them in place. The biggest question definitely was that wide receiver position that Rashee Rice stepped up. I think they still want to get more help, even more help there. But you had to solidify a defense that was number one in the league in yards per play when Chris Jones was on the field, and number 23 in the league in yards per play when he was off the field. He makes that big a difference. And we've talked about that with defensive tackles, especially this offseason, of just what they've meant to teams and how their presence is growing. We always, ball players know up the middle, man, up the middle, D tackles, middle backers, safeties, how important that spine, as you call it, of the defense is. And the D tackles have really showed out.
He is the one guy up front for the Kansas City Chiefs that on his own is a matchup nightmare. Everyone else you look at there, they've done and they drafted well. George Karlaftis, I thought really took a big step forward this past season, flashed a lot for them, but still is not the caliber of player Chris Jones is in terms of commanding attention. To your point, when they move him all around the defense, you've always got to have eyes. You devote the lion's share of your resources to him. And I wondered how that one domino, were you to take it out and allow him to walk in free agency, affects the entire rest of one of the most complex and innovative defensive schemes led by Steve Spagnuolo, who we know is an absolute monster. But, Dad, to your point, too, about the defensive tackle spot, you had that reflected elsewhere, right? Justin Madubuike, the Baltimore Ravens, get signed to a deal for him, 4 years, $98 million, with $75 million guaranteed at signing, a record number at that time for when he was signed there. Obviously, a lot of this got usurped by Chris Jones. The average annual value was second only to Aaron Donald until Chris Jones got signed for a higher average annual value than Aaron Donald with this most recent contract. But it's an admission, one, I think, for that deal that, hey, Baltimore, we know it was a big 1 year jump in production, and so he wasn't going to match a lot of those guys, but kind of like the deals we saw for Quinnen Williams and Jeffrey Simmons the offseason before, it's, hey, we know this position is really important, and we got one of the dudes at that position in a year where we're trying to make the jump from Mike McDonald leaving and going elsewhere to keep everything in-house and make sure this defense doesn't get too far on track. They've got one of the big important pieces for that in a defense that did as much as they want to do. You got to have a war daddy in the middle, and they've got one, and so they recognize the importance of that.
I just love the guy that bet on himself, right? So Madubuike was in his rookie deal. It was the last year of his rookie deal. He was a third-round pick back in 2020. So a guy in the last year of his deal, I think he made a little over $1 million, and they actually tried to sign him to an extension during training camp, and they didn't agree to one. And Madubuike basically said, I'm going to bet on myself that I'm going to have a big year. And you just love when that pays off, right? He went out and he had himself a big year. So he went from making 1 year of a little over $1 million to now, until Chris Jones signed, what would have been the second most for a defensive tackle. So good on him, man. When you bet on yourself, you say, you know what? I see the money they're offering here. I think I can be worth more. And then you go out and you show that. So good for him. Love to see it for those defensive guys, for sure. Any player, really, quite honestly. But, I have a certain, place in my heart for that interior defensive line.
Well, and Dad, as someone who was a part of that group, I think you can appreciate a lot of where this comes from, too. I've always said in football, and this is a conversation that comes up a lot in terms of running backs, where you've got so many different body types and so many guys that can play that position at a high level that it makes it really difficult for the best ones to get paid as the league is currently situated right now. And while Aaron Donald, I think, has done a lot for modern defensive tackle scouting, where we're seeing even in this draft, guys in that 6'1", 285 range have a lot more viable path forward because Aaron Donald has shown you, hey, with vicious, lethal quickness and hot hands, you can make a lot happen at a spot, even if you're not a 300-plus pound monster that's going to come in there and dominate in the way that we had been used to seeing for so long at that spot. But still, finding guys even with that body type, but especially finding guys that are 6'2", 6'3", 315-plus pounds that can move like this, those are athletic marvels. There aren't a lot of those that exist, and so I do think there's something to the scarcity and the rarity of saying, hey, if we got one of these dudes who's got all the traits we look at the combine and he's come out and produced for us at this level, we know that's going to be really hard to find in a league that's going to demand it more and more going forward, so we got to pay these dudes.
And I think people also need to realize that it's not just the number you see in a box score, right? We saw him with, 13 sacks that he had this year. He did have the monster year, and I understand getting to the quarterback in a passing league is big. But sometimes it's the plays that don't show up in the box score that work. When you flush a quarterback out, and screw up the timing of the play. When you make penetration and all of a sudden the back has to go east and west, not north and south, but you don't make the tackle, but you're part of the play. You're the reason the play was a 1-yard loss, even though you weren't in on the tackle. That's a position where there's a lot of unseen when guard tackle wants to combo block you and the backer, and you don't let that guard get off to the backer, and the backer's free to make a play. Again, something that doesn't show up in a box score. So that's a position like that where then when you get gaudy numbers, you're like even more wow. But a lot of times it is that stuff that those unseen things or written things in a box score of what interior D linemen do so well.
Well, if we're going to celebrate war daddies in the middle of a defensive line, then Claudia, it feels only right to celebrate a man who decided to hang up the cleats this weekend here. One of the names that we had gotten to know at this position and had done both the unsung jobs and the sung jobs very, very well in Fletcher Cox of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, Philly got to know him well after 12 years with the team. He posted on X announcing his retirement. He said, I fulfilled a lifelong dream by making it to the NFL, but what I didn't know at the time was how much of an honor and privilege it would be to represent the city of Philadelphia and the Eagles organization for the next 12 seasons. I gave everything I had to this team and to this city. I don't know what's next for me, but I do know that I'm forever grateful for my time here in Philadelphia and with the Eagles organization. And meanwhile, the Eagles announced they have signed another veteran D lineman, agreeing on a 1-year deal with Brandon Graham. And then last but not least, Ian Rappaport is reporting that the Eagles are shopping both defensive end Josh Sweat and edge Hassan Reddick, so looking for some reinforcements for that defense. But of course, the Fletcher Cox news is probably a little bittersweet for some Philly fans.
I'd imagine it is, but everything you just underscored there, Claudia, there's so much change going on for Philadelphia right now in an offseason and a year where they're coming off colossal disappointment after the Super Bowl appearance the year prior. And now, Dad, you look at a base level at this team where, yes, there are personnel needs we know they're going to need. Fletcher Cox have been a little more injured as of late. They drafted guys like Jordan Davis and other players like Jalen Carter that are expected to fill his production there. But linebacker in the secondary, all these places that have become an issue. But from a locker room standpoint, you're now down Jason Kelce on one side of the ball as your leader and voice, maybe of the team, but certainly of the offensive unit in that offensive line, and Fletcher Cox on the other side, who both, I don't know adult life without these two as the mainstays in Philadelphia. And so that void, Dad, and how Philadelphia fills that from a leadership standpoint in that locker room is going to be fascinating.
Think of the battles that those guys had, Mike, in training camps, the one-on-ones. with Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox. I mean, those two have probably hit each other more than any pair I can think of for as long as they have been together, helping make each other better. I mean, just a remarkable career for both of them. For Fletcher Cox, one-time first-team All-Pro, three-time second-team, six-time Pro Bowler, 2010 All-Decade Team. I mean, he had done so much for Philly, but you're right. This is a sign of change, especially on that defensive side. He retires. The edge rushers had been getting up there in age a little bit. They basically punted on the linebacker position last year in who they let go and who they brought in from a standpoint of what the average was in a cap hit for linebackers and how below that was for Philly. And then they had injuries there, and then they had injuries in the secondary. So that defense really struggled. So, yeah, not only, and we say this, not only the physical aspect of losing players like Kelce and Fletcher Cox, but what they mean in locker rooms. As I said, you never have to have the C on your chest. Which these guys do, but you know who the leaders are. You don't have to all of a sudden anoint somebody a captain to know they're the leader. You know who the leaders are, and those guys were leaders of that team, and that's something that will be gone, right? Who takes over those spots for Philadelphia? It's one of those intangible things that is incredibly tangible in a locker room, without question. So a hell of a career. We weren't sure what was going to happen last year. He comes back on the one-year deal. They weren't able to get back. I thought they would get back. I thought it'd be a rematch in the Super Bowl, but man, they just floundered after the 10-1 start. So they definitely have some rebuilding to do, and now they're doing it without two guys that have meant a hell of a lot to this organization over the last more than last decade.
Thought it was really cool. The Eagles put out the video where Fletcher addressed the team in the post-game locker room after their final game and told them about this and the fact that had never made it out. Now, we had the Adam Schefter reporting around Jason Kelce and some people wondering if maybe this is what he had heard of in reference to Fletcher Cox instead of Jason Kelce. But either way, the fact that they'd had this banked, the fact that he did get to tell his teammates first, but that everybody involved respected their leader enough to make sure that didn't see the light of day until he was absolutely sure and ready for that moment is a reminder of how special a place locker rooms can be and what they're capable of there. But Dad, you're right. This is a team last year that was 26th in the NFL in total defense, 31st in passing yards allowed per game, and had allowed 35 total touchdowns last year, and is almost going to look completely different on both sides of the ball now. We know Kellen Moore coming over as the offensive coordinator, Vic Fangio coming over as the defensive coordinator. It completely changes it, but it really does feel like a full changing of the guard where now, Dad, there is as much pressure on Jalen Hurts as a player as anyone I can remember and think of in the NFL. Obviously, his counterpart, Dak Prescott, in the NFC East is always going to be in that conversation, but Jalen Hurts is now expected to be the unquestioned voice of that offense with Jason Kelce gone and has to rebound from a season where a lot of people coming off that payday were starting to look at him and going, well, why aren't you elevating these parts beyond a certain point when this offense seems to stall out the second half of the year?
Yeah. It will be interesting who takes over now. You need all the Georgia defensive players to take over right on the defensive side of the ball and all step up and do their thing, including, Nakobe Dean, who was hurt, one of the linebackers that was hurt for them, as well as Carter and Davis in the middle of that defensive line. But how do they step up? Remember, the season started so well for them. How does it start now? All of a sudden, there are some head scratching going on and question marks on that team of what they are going forward. And now with there's pretty significant changes they're going to make. Some they definitely needed to make, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But for a team that was coming off the Super Bowl and then floundered the way they did, now, as we mentioned before, will be in 3 years, the third year coming up, will be on their third different offensive coordinator and third different defensive coordinator. For a team that was considered one of the better teams in the NFL, there seems to be a lot of worry as to what direction this team is going to be going in.
Currently 9th in the Super Bowl odds heading into this season. Nick Sirianni's job, remember, was talked about a lot at the end of last season, and I imagine is immediately going to be in hot seat mode there as they enter the 2024 season with a ton of need on defense and a ton of change coming on both sides of the ball as leaders in Jason Kelce and now Fletcher Cox both decide that they're hitting the road and going to watch these games from the stand and probably get ready to see their names in a Ring of Honor somewhere very, very soon around there in Philadelphia. Coming up next, though, if you you are looking for marquee defensive talent coming out of the draft, we got a young man for you. Laiatu Latu, the former UCLA All-American linebacker, going to join us next to talk about his path to the draft here on GoJo and Golic. All right, very excited now as we march closer and closer to the NFL draft to welcome in a guy whose name is going to be called very early and be helping someone very soon get after quarterbacks in the NFL. Former UCLA Bruins star and All-American linebacker Laiatu Latu, kind enough to join us now here on the show. He was the first ever Lombardi Award winner at UCLA. He's the second-ranked outside linebacker on Mel Kiper Jr.'s draft board. And for anyone unfamiliar with your story, obviously almost a career that didn't happen, was almost derailed by a neck injury during your time at Washington, that ended up forcing you to transfer to UCLA, where you continued an incredibly prolific career. And I want to start there. I know this is something that's so tied into your story that you talk about so much, but how has it impacted you? How has it turned you into the player that's now getting ready for this moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, taking something away that meant so much to me, like football, that's all I've known growing up. And then having it taken away, I mean, that's all I knew. And, I loved it so much. So when I got it back, I feel like, I got my heart back. And, I live every day, like it's your last. And I use that slogan. I take it into the meeting rooms, even into the classroom. And I write at the top of my notes, like your last, just to remind me, every snap, every note that I take, do it like it's your last, because you never know when, that's going to be your last opportunity.
So along those lines, when you came back from that, when you went to UCLA and came back from that, was there a moment, because this was a neck injury that we're talking about, was there a moment when you came back that you thought maybe this wasn't a good idea, or was it 100 miles an hour the whole way?
It was 100 miles an hour the whole way. I mean, 2 months after, it was a 6-month 6 to 9 month recovery, but 2 months after, I go and play some, men's club rugby out in Seattle. I played rugby since the 5th grade, but I'm going to play, I jump in with some of the men's, the club team out here. I'm tackling them, running around. I'm 19 at that time, but it's 2 months after my surgery, and I'm running around. And it's funny because the head coach at the Seattle Seawolves for the MLR actually called me up after a little bit of time playing with that team and told me to come out and try out for this 3-day camp. Did the 3-day camp, and he actually wanted to sign me to their team. But, I had to tell him, my passion is football. So, I was still doing school and stuff like that. But, I had to, put that down.
Oh, all right. I always feel like I always feel like rugby players think football players are playing an easier sport. Tell us the truth here. Which one is physically tougher to do?
So I would say football is just more, you can get hurt a lot more, but rugby, it's a lot of like form fitted. So it's a lot of like surface stuff, scars and stuff like that. You don't hear too much about, broken arms or nothing like that, but it's always form fitted. So no one's really getting hurt too much. It's always like head to head, contact, not like people are hitting heads, but, it's form tackling. You can't dive at people's legs without your arms. You can't go too high or else they'll call a penalty. But I mean, you got to be a lot more athletic to play rugby.
Wow. It's always interesting to hear because so my dad's a former collegiate wrestler and high school wrestler, and you hear a lot of people talk about that in terms of football. And over the years, people have heard with the Seahawks, the rugby tackling and stuff. But what is the area you think in rugby that helps you the most and helped you the most as a football player to get to now?
Well, I mean, we actually did like some like kind of like wrestling stuff like in rugby, but a lot of wrestlers like in high school, they came and played rugby, and they actually it transitioned well. They were like really good because they're tough and stuff like that. But it's really just the athleticism. Like you got to know when to switch to offense to defense. You got to be able to catch the ball. You got to be able to throw the ball, and when you throw the ball, it's always you got to throw it always behind you, so it can't be ahead of you, or else they'll call it a penalty. It's called a forward, and you can't, throw it forward. But you got to have hand-eye coordination. You got to be fast. You got to be able to take a hit and tackle, and you got to all do it like within a matter of seconds, kind of.
It's a fascinating sport to watch. I absolutely love it. So you obviously move past that. You're trying to live out your dream here and make it into the NFL. So as you're getting ready for that and doing all these drills that have nothing to do with the NFL and getting ready for the combine and the pro day, but getting ready for the NFL, when you look at yourself, what are things that you believe you need to improve on the most to not only make the next level, but be successful there?
Yeah, definitely working on my upper body strength and making sure that, when I'm taking on blocks, that I do it like a lot more violently, a lot more physically, and a lot more consistently. And when I'm shedding off blocks, making sure that I'm doing it violently, and I'm making sure I'm really getting clear my trail leg, trail arm, and, getting past those, alignment so that I'm not getting washed out the way.
Obviously, those are things you want to improve on. There's so much already that you're great at. And I think a lot of people talk about you in this pass rusher class as one of the more polished pro-ready guys now with your moves and how clean you are technically. I saw your old defensive coordinator, D'Anton Lynn, was talking about your preparation process. And he said you prepare like the NFL guys that he played with and known. So I'm curious for you, what is that process like? How do you approach getting ready for a game in a way that you think separates you from others?
Yeah, so I mean, the Sundays that because we started practicing on Sundays, so I make sure I watch at least 30 minutes of the game, like of the night before. Make sure I need to correct anything that I need from the game before going into that week, and then 30 minutes like after to an hour, and after I'll let the tape roll of the next team that we're playing, just kind of get a feel what kind of offense they are and how they move around and stuff like that. And then throughout the week, I'm really taking like the O-line piece by piece with the tight end and the running backs, but really kind of like picking out their strengths and weaknesses. Because I rush everywhere on the D line. I can rush from the shade, the 3 tech, 5, 9, and really I got to know the whole alignment. So every time we go, it's a pass play, I know how each one sets, whether they're a high puncher, low puncher. If they set more vertically, more laterally. If they try to jump the counter, if they're slow off the ball, if they're top heavy, or they're good with their footwork or not. So it's just little things that I'm picking out throughout the week. A lot of tips and tendencies that can give me that edge when it comes game time.
Well, I'll tell you what NFL teams will love. On 1st and 10, you turn it into a 2nd and 12 for as much as you live in the opponent's backfield. That part's very impressive to watch. As far as like at the combine and talking to teams, what have you heard from teams? What have they been saying to you?
So really just when they ask for my strengths and weaknesses, just like I told you what my what I need to improve on. And they pretty much agree, but they all tell me that my pass rush is what they need.
What was for you going through the combine? Everyone always hears about the questions, the interview process there. Was there anything in there that stuck out to you? Anything that caught you off guard about that interview process and the way people always describe?
No, actually, and it wasn't as bad as as some people might say, but it was just a lot of meetings and going back and forth and stuff like that. But it was good. I mean, one thing that did stick out to me was I think it was the Bucks, but I can't remember. I walked in and they had a little like putt set up, and I was like, "Damn, I'm horrible at golf." So they're like, "All right, we're on the darts." So then I get on the darts, and we're playing darts. And then, he grabs more darts and hands me them. He's like, "All right, now get a bullseye." I'm like, "All right, I'm trying my hardest." So, I get close, but I didn't get there.
It is always amazing what teams try and do. I'm wondering, going to UCLA, you play for Chip Kelly. How were you surprised at all that he left a head coaching job for an offensive coordinator job when he left UCLA to go to Ohio State?
I mean, I was pretty surprised. I mean, I didn't see that coming at all. But I hope, all the best for him. I think that's, if he feels this was best for him, then that's what's best for him. But I love that Coach Foster took over. I mean, he's just going to change the culture. I mean, like in a good way too. Like where, he's just more personable with a lot of people and stuff like that, and can be close to a lot of the, the team.
I'm curious for you now. We've talked a lot about your preparation for the next level, and you seem like a big student of the game. Who are some of the guys, current players in the NFL, if any, that you've watched, that you've tried to take stuff from, and what?
Yeah, definitely Max Crosby is one of those people. I mean, just his tenacity at playing the game. He's always working, one move and then to the next. If it's not working, then always to the next. In the run game, he's making plays in the backfield, as much as he can. And he really just plays with that, that high motor that, is really appealing to me. And then another dude for me is TJ Watt. I mean, the way he hits his move and is crisp with all his moves and sets up his people over time, that's kind of what I look out for in those two.
No, a lot of similarities there. The incredible motor, the effort, but like you said, the technique that you've become so well known for in your time in college, as productive as it was. It's why I'd imagine some team is going to be calling your name very early in the NFL draft, and a fan base is going to be very, very excited. We can't thank you enough for the time. Best of luck with everything going forward, and we're looking forward to watching you do your thing on Sundays.
here on GoJo and Golic just in time for Cash It or Trash It, presented by DraftKings. Stay tuned to hear all that DraftKings has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problems? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. On Friday's edition of Cash It or Trash It, we focused on the Academy Awards. GoJo had a passionate plea for Across the Spider-Verse, which was the favorite to win Best Animated Feature, but it was beat out. GoJo, how upset are you by this? Boy and the Heron.
Yeah, so I love the Oscars because I like to see a bunch of movies. I'm by no means an expert. Adnan Virk and the guys over at the Dan Le Batard show, who I saw did a great show for that last night. Like, Adnan's the guy who's got all that information. He has always done a great job with his Cinephile podcast over the years. He knows what he's talking about here. And we spend the rest of our lives trying to know what we're talking about here when it comes to the world of sports, especially football. I like walking into the Oscars because I get to Stu Gotts this thing. Finger wag and have takes that have no backing or merit here. And I was pissed that Across the Spider-Verse lost out on this award. And as I tried to go and lobby for its case on Twitter, I got universally sent back to the student section by the boy in the heron. That sounds like it was exemplary. It sounds like the animator who is in charge of this movie is an all-time legend and very much deserved this. And I don't care, because the thing that I like didn't get the recognition that I, an idiot, think it deserves, and so now I get to war against it. And I got to tell you, it is a very freeing feeling, Dan. I love this.
I enjoyed the fact that I had no horses in the race, because the only movie I saw of the ones involved in Best Picture was Barbie. So I as far as actors and actresses and everything, I had no horse in the race at all, because I hadn't seen a lot of these movies. We did kind of hit it on the Cash It with the trifecta of Christopher Nolan, director for Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy, best actor for Oppenheimer, and then it won Best Picture as well. We had talked about all three of those. They won 7. Oppenheimer won 7 of their 13 nominations. I'm going to tell you what I like best about the night, Mike. Some of the funny stuff, like I said, I dug John Cena coming out naked, like they're reenacting the streaker scene from 50 years ago. And when you have a body like John
Cena's body, I'd be naked all the time in public. All the time. You would have to arrest me. I mean,
all between, he was there, The Rock was there, Liam Hemsworth was there. I mean, come on. I mean, are you kidding me? I'm sorry, Chris Hemsworth. Yeah. So the best part of, or what I thought was the coolest thing, was for actor, actress, supporting actor, supporting actress. They brought back 5 winners, and they brought them out on stage, and each winner talked about one of the nominees for the winner to be the winner last night. I thought that was very, very cool how they did that for the 4 major awards there with actors and actresses. I thought that was a great touch on the night. I really did.
I agree, because normally you show the clips from the movies that they were all involved in, Claudia, and I don't usually think you get a ton from those clips. If you haven't seen the movie, you don't really have the context to understand how well acted this is, but to see that moment between a couple of people that are peers, especially some of the unhinged ones, like having Nicolas Cage up on stage, really warmed my heart.
See, that's the kind of stuff I want. Like, that makes me want to watch. If you bring a naked John Cena and Nicolas Cage. I will say one shout out to Emma Stone, because I haven't seen like a ton of her stuff, but just from the little I've seen, I knew she was a good actress, but I didn't realize just how many awards that she was up for and then won. So she's a beast. And then also, I actually did have money on the Oscars, despite not watching it. Godzilla -1. I won Best Visual Effects. Obviously, I didn't think of that, but there's people in the industry, to what you said, GoJo, that know this stuff to its core. And somebody told me that was going to win, and it did. So I love the Oscars now.
One I usually use the Oscars as like a little appetizer sampler platter to see which of these movies I actually want to go and see after the fact, based on the reception they get, based on the few clips that we see there. Godzilla -1, absolutely on the list. The other thing that stuck out to me from last night, it's impossible to go past my man Ryan Gosling. The Kenergy sweatshirt that I'm wearing, if you're watching on DraftKings this morning, as Ryan Gosling went out and performed his I'm Just Ken song from the Barbie movie at the Oscars, and did so effortlessly and wonderful. You saw Billie Eilish behind him and Margot Robbie in front of him, both choking back laughter as he's going out and doing this with the utmost sincerity, the same way that he attacked this role and gave us a banner performance of the night here. So as in that movie where it's obviously about Barbie, but Ryan Gosling made the role of Ken shine through, he did it again here at the Oscars.
So you look at that, that was the Barbenheimer weekend, that was so talked about. You're going to see Barbie and then Oppenheimer, two distinctly different types of movies, no doubt about that. And Oppenheimer was up for 13 awards and Barbie was up for 8. So of the 21, they got 8 awards, with Oppenheimer getting 7. Mike, were you surprised the only win for Barbie was Best Song? Billie Eilish had the Best Song, got the Oscar for that. I wasn't surprised. I didn't think it was going to do well. It didn't seem to be the movie that fits into the Oscar award situation where everybody can take themselves a little bit too friggin' seriously.
Yeah, I'm not surprised it went down that way. So I was disappointed. I wanted it to get the respect I thought it deserved there, but did not. I will say, I mentioned what Ryan Gosling did. It was because he had to follow the Billie Eilish performance for What Was I Made For that ended up winning the Oscar, which was incredible. Billie is an absolute juggernaut and just seems like a complete joy. So I was thrilled for her. That performance was amazing. And you're right. Sadly, the only Greta Gerwig got a ton of love from everybody that was up on the stage around that movie, someone who seemed robbed at least of the nomination of Best Director going into this. I will say the one thing that a couple things really stuck out to me overall. I wanted to try out this take for you guys because Dad mentioned you had all these actors going up here and basically giving the nomination speech for each of the other ones there. And Robert Downey Jr. was nominated for his role in Oppenheimer. And it made me think back as people were remarking, because the guy on stage had been in one of the Iron Man movies with him. I'm blanking on his name right now because I'm terrible at names. But it made me think, has there been a better cast character and a more important casting in the history of film than Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark in Iron Man? Because I would maintain that one role, in addition to being so perfect, because every time you see Robert Downey Jr. on stage, he is everything that Tony Stark is supposed to be. That is art perfectly mirroring life. It's also the role that allowed the Marvel franchise to dominate for well over a decade at the box office. So I don't know if you guys even have other suggestions here. I saw other people say Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, another important franchise, and a guy that seems so perfectly tailor-made for the role, but I don't know who tops RDJ in this.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons you can lean toward Schwarzenegger is because he wasn't an actor. Schwarzenegger was a bodybuilder who went into acting and just blew up that franchise. I mean, this is what Robert Downey Jr. did. He's an actor, so he's going to be in movies. I didn't see Schwarzenegger becoming the governor of California and then had the franchise of the Terminator the way he did. So in the out of nowhere category, I'd give it to Schwarzenegger because that was so unexpected. But Robert Downey Jr. and what he's done, and he's especially he's the one who will bring up his past, even though Kimmel tried to do it last night as well, of just the drug related past that he had, and bringing up his manager of 40 years who spent half of that time basically bailing him out of prison. So I'm a big fan of his. I was happy for him. Claudia, going back to what you said quickly about Emma Stone, I mean, she's 35. She just won her second Oscar. Her first one was for La La Land. She's been nominated 5 times. And I love her more for like Superbad and Easy A, movies that were never going to get the Oscar recognition. But what Poor Things did, I mean, really, kind of started really ticking them off there in the beginning of the show of winning Oscars. I thought, wow, are they going to start taking some of these away from Oppenheimer? And then she wins Best Actress. So big fan of hers. I mean, what a career, just 35.
Yeah, she's the best.
How dare, by the way, the Brits confuse me on an already confusing day. We had daylight savings coming up that already makes me nervous enough. And apparently British Mother's Day is March 10th. So you've got all these guys going up on stage wishing Mom a happy Mother's Day. And I guarantee you every guy in America that was watching flinched for a moment, unsure if all of a sudden the calendar had flipped to that weekend and they were up Bleeps Creek without a paddle. All right, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the rest of the day. As always, download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Do it. I'm serious. And check us out here live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on DraftKings Network, wherever you get that. You can catch the best of GoJo and Golic wherever you hear VSiN on the radio from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern each and every day. And if you missed any of our great guests, like former UCLA Bruins star Laiatu Latu that's getting ready for the NFL Draft, you can check that out wherever you get the podcast or right here available on YouTube as soon as we get done with the show. Guys, let's get to this. We talked a lot about the NBA earlier, Rudy Gobert, Anthony Davis, Steve Kerr back in the crosshairs, this time because his celebrity doppelganger ended up at the Golden State Warriors game. Now, they showed this guy on camera, but the more amazing part to me is that his lookalike, who is also named Steve Gillis, is an English teacher at Bishop Gorman High School and apparently like a local club girls volleyball legend around there. He's the co-founder of the Summerlin Volleyball Academy. He was the women's coach at Whitworth University in Spokane, Washington from 92 to 94. He led Gonzaga Prep to a #1 ranking before. So what are the odds that another Steve also happens to be an incredibly accomplished coach just sitting here stewing at the Warriors game? He looks pissed.
I think that's just his face. It's just the resting bee face, you know. But also assistant coach for U.S. men's volleyball team in 1998. So this dude really has his own prolific career, but it's genuinely uncanny how much he looks like Kerr.
It really is. I mean, it truly is. Do either one of you guys have a doppelganger out there who you get mentioned with?
I've gotten like Amanda Seyfried sometimes, people say. But I guess that's more of like a celebrity, doppelganger. But I don't really see it. GoJo?
I tend to get Megan Fox a lot.
Oh, I knew that was coming.
I really missed an opportunity there. Man.
Yeah, you did. Well, I would like to say for me it was Chris Hemsworth. It's not, but I would get occasionally, ever since I grew the beard and it started turning white and the hair started turning white. Remember the old commercial of the Dos Equis guy, the most interesting man in the world?
Yeah.
That guy, because he had that white hair and the white beard. I would get that occasionally. Jonathan Goldsmith, I think, is his name, but that's where some would go with me, where my eventual look, I want this all white on my face, all white on my hair, and I want to look like Moses. That will be, then I'll know I've hit it.
That's been your goal forever, and it is attainable at this point. Like, for me, I get every bald, bearded white guy. Like, we're all Kyle Long variants, I've said. He's the original patient zero of all this, and the rest of us are just like Zach Galifianakis from the second and third Hangover movies. Dad, what I will say is one of my favorite moments, and God rest his soul, was when I was at the Indianapolis Super Bowl walking about 10 steps behind you, and at that point, you had not lost a lot of your weight, so you were still a little bit on the heavier side, and I see two fans come tearing past me, yelling, "Goose! Goose!" running towards you in front of me on the sidewalk because they thought you were Tony Saragusa. So again, God rest the all-time legend, but that was one case of a mistaken identity that made me laugh my ass off.
That, you know what, it fit though. Goose and I were probably close to the same size at that point. So, and a former D tackle. So, us D tackles, we all look alike.
Yeah, the white defensive tackle brotherhood there showing its colors truly. Claudia, let's get to that as we've talked a lot about the business of college sports changing rapidly. There's one group that apparently wants to introduce that into the men's basketball world in a way that's pretty unique.
Yeah, an NIL tournament might be coming to men's college basketball. It would be an in-season tournament called Players Era, reportedly launching this upcoming fall, so pretty quickly. It'll offer teams up to $2 million in name, image, and likeness deals. According to a report from Front Office Sports, it would feature 8 teams and take place at MGM Arena in Vegas, where everything's happening now. And Senior, I know you were curious about what teams possibly involved. Just discussions with Bama, Duke, FAU, Houston, Kansas, Oregon, San Diego State, some of the bigger names. But interesting, GoJo, like you said, this is just going to be the beginning to what I'm sure will be very much involvement between NIL and college. It looks like basketball now. Is there any bad parts about this, or do you think this is sort of good for the game, GoJo?
Well, so I think it builds off of what we saw happen in the NBA, right, where the in-season tournament was such a success. And for college basketball, I'm sure, especially on the men's side, they're looking for ways to dress this up and create a little bit more interest in their product earlier than we get usually now, siphoned off and siloed into March. The interesting part's going to be, while they haven't secured a television partner yet, Dad, is how this goes with the current landscape of the NCAA, because this very much blurs the line of pay for play, where before you weren't supposed to have these sort of enticements. Right. But this, I don't know how you can frame it any other way than you're being paid for your performance in this tournament.
Yeah, but funneling it through NIL funds is their way around it, I guess. Because listen, first off, I'm not saying anything bad about it because I didn't think the NBA in-season tournament was going to work, and it worked. I thought it was excellent. So. And in this case, what the report, what does it say? Each school will receive $1 million in NIL funds, with the winning team getting another $1 million, with the stipulation the money has to go to the players. So, yeah, this definitely starts to blur some lines. But as we've said, if it puts money in the pockets of the players, I'm all for it. What you're going to see, I think, because Claudia, you started mentioning some of the teams. There's a whole lot of the men's basketball programs out there who are going to be saying, wait a minute, why can't we get in this tournament? The NBA, it's all the teams, right? In the college basketball, they obviously can't do that, so they're picking 8. How do you get to be one of the lucky 8 who is going to get handed money like that to distribute to your players?
That is a really good point.
Used to be jockeying to try and get invited to the Jim Maui Invitational so you can get a trip to Hawaii. Now it's just trying to secure the bag. Either way, I do think this is a smart practice from college basketball, especially on the men's side, to try and manufacture some of that interest in a very interesting time for the sport. We're talking about expanding the tournament. The men's sign to seed one and done, I think, take a lot of the talented players away from the sport pretty early on. So as they grapple with a lot of change, this is an interesting solution. And again, like you said, Dad, one I'm all for because it puts money in the pockets of the players where it's belonged for quite some time. Let's get to the third, guys. I am always for creative methods for drinking at sporting events, and the Carolina Hurricanes have gone above and beyond now with the beer sticks that they have introduced.
Yeah, I don't know about this one. I guess I kind of get it, but on Thursday, the team introduced this, as you can see. And if you can't see it, it's a clear stick. It's a hockey stick. And the bottom, black. I'm not sure if the beer goes all the way down. I'm assuming it doesn't. On Reddit, people say the stick costs $10. Then you have to also pay for the beer. Another commenter said, the last 1/3 of the beer comes at you really fast if you're not careful. Like, really fast, which I understand because I have drinking out of things like this. And that happens where it just goes all over your face and you look like a drunk idiot, even if you're not drunk, but it's just hard to drink out of. So I know, Senior, you like to chug beers. Is this something that you would consider?
Listen, yeah, the beer coming out at the end, that's like Das Boot. I mean, you have to understand when the bubble's going to burst in there and it's going to come gushing out. You have to be seasoned. There is nothing I wouldn't drink beer out of, and there isn't a chugging contest I wouldn't get involved in. I am a beer guy. I like chugging beer. I'll chug beer out of anything. I don't care.
Anything?
I'm all for it.
Would you do a shoey?
Ooh.
Sure.
Would you?
Sure.
Do you know what a shoey is?
A dirty shoe off of somebody's foot. You would put beer into and then into your mouth.
I would
it's
hope
your
the
shoe.
probable. My shoe? In a heartbeat. Yeah. Why
Disgusting.
not? Absolutely.
All right, you know what?
Now,
Someone invite my father to your sporting event so he can drink beer out of a shoe. That seems to be the end result.
That's legendary. My friends just got married, actually, and they did shoeies together, like right after the wedding.
There you go.
In their wedding dress.
There you go.
It was disgusting.
Right after the wedding or after the
care.
reception?
It was after the not in the church. No, that would have been legendary, though.
Well, I just wasn't sure because after the reception, you got a whole lot of sweat and other juices that have coagulated in the wedding shoes.
Oh, yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're getting a different flavor of beer at that point.
It was a sweaty beer nonetheless, and it was disgusting.
It's okay.
And Senior,
Just gotta chug
we
it down.
believe you, Senior. You don't have to show us. Please never do a shoey. You're a cool dad enough.
No. We need to see the proof in the pudding on this one. Whether it's out of a stick, shout out to the beer bats at the Hartford Yard Goats games in the summer, or a shoey. We're going to get to the bottom of this so my dad can explore one of his greatest interests, which is chugging beer out of random things here. If your interests include this podcast, make sure you go and download, subscribe, rate, and review it. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out here live when you can. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.